We're back, and we're going to talk about this session is ecosystems. Ecosystems, all part of the environment. Environment is critical to all life on Earth as it sustains all life on Earth. Now, man uses the environment like any other creature on Earth. Use it in different ways. Man's use of the environment can be beneficial or it can be destructive. Either one. But history shows it's much easier to destroy than it is to create. Nature has an incredible ability to repair itself, but it takes time to do that. Centuries or millennia or even millions of years. But it can regenerate itself. The book gives the famous story of the city of Times Beach, Missouri. Mid-sized, pleasant community. You will not find it on any map anywhere anymore. It does not exist. 1971, the whole community is contaminated with dioxin. Dioxin is a pesticide. Very dangerous to human beings. Because apparently what happened was somehow dioxin got mixed in with some oil that the company was spraying on the city streets. Dioxin does not break down when mixed with water, not like many other types of chemicals. So this toxin was all on the city streets. Now the idea of spraying this oil on the ground was to try to control dust, which of course dust could be a pollutant, a naturally occurring one. But the situation has now been made even worse because now everything's coated with dioxin. The result, dead animals, miscarriages, cancer reported ensuing months and years, causing many deaths. The situation is so bad that in 1983, the federal government closed down the city of Times Beach, moved everybody out, and closed it off from the rest of the world. Even the highways that are running through there were rerouted around it. Oh, you can still find the remains of the city, but it's still so contaminated that no one can live there. That's an example of the damage that can be done by improper use of chemicals. Destruction of an entire city, forcing it to be abandoned. Another example is Love Canal, New York. It was a subdivision just outside of Buffalo, New York. But it's built on the side of an old toxic waste dump. See, decades before there were any kind of environmental laws regarding where you can dump toxic chemicals and waste products, remember, toxic simply means poisonous. And there are many degrees of toxic. Some of it's glow-in-the-dark radioactive. Some is instantaneously fatal, like various kinds of cyanides. Others are slow and insidious. The repeated exposure over a long period of time can cause cancer, all sorts of different kinds of illnesses, and eventually death. But not instantly, but over an extended period of time. Now, toxic are simply just very mild. But we're talking about the heavy-duty industrial kind of toxic waste. Remember, toxic waste is any kind of poisonous waste. And there's a variety of these produced in all sorts of different industrial processes. Well, a lot of these manufacturing techniques have changed over the decades, and the toxic byproducts aren't as common anymore, and they are safely controlled and safely disposed of according to federal regulations, but only because there are federal regulations, only because there are rules saying there's process you have to go through, there's forms you have to fill out, there are people you have to contact, there are processes that have to be done, which can be time consuming and expensive, but what's more time consuming or expensive? Going to the hospital for cancer treatment, going to a funeral. And you really put a price on a human life. People tried to. That's not ethical. The idea of responsibility, corporate responsibility for what it took, for the products it makes, and for the waste it produces, that was the idea behind environmental protection laws. But before all these came in place, companies have all gallons and gallons, hundreds and thousands of gallons of industrial waste products, liquids they're producing, or from liquid byproducts, or air pollution being released in the air. And they needed some place to put it. So what would they do? They just find some empty field and just bury it or just dump it there on the ground. Not think anything about the consequences of it. Out of sight, out of mind. So this subdivision built here in the 1950s. No one really knows about it. And in this time period, there weren't any type of environmental studies done for construction. That's standard practice today, required by law. So you know what is the impact of building something, but also know what is there before anything was built. Those studies weren't done. So in the 1960s and 1970s, when these homes were built, there are dozens of cases of birth defects and cancer before the area's past was discovered, or anyone discovered what this company had done and hidden and covered up. Soil tests showed soil was hopelessly contaminated with the most vilest of toxins. Some of those are barrels that were basically being pushed up to the surface, metal barrels that were falling apart over years of interaction of the acids and chemicals inside these barrels and from years of decay inside the ground. And in New York, of course, a lot of basements was happening. A lot of these chemicals actually were bubbling up into the basements. Chemicals themselves in the soil and the vapors in the air from these chemicals were making everybody sick. It's a horrible scandal when erupted. By the late 1970s, Lake Canal was completely evacuated. Like I said, the situation became a morbid joke. Just the callousness of how corporations and individuals just dump waste on the ground that any kind of concern will have affect anybody else. The result was all sorts of deaths, illness, birth defects, handicaps, because of a few people deciding to be lazy and not caring about anybody else. Many, many other examples. But by contrast, Israel, the state of Israel is founded in 1948, is largely barren wastelands, an arid plain that wasn't suitable for hardly anything. But after decades of careful nurturing and growth, this scrubland was turned into a thriving agricultural region. Israel has a lot of agricultural products, what is basically the edge of a desert. They made the desert bloom. Example of transforming environment for constructive purposes. See examples of this even in cities everywhere. old garbage dumps cleaned up and turned into parks, perfectly safe, perfectly healthy, their own thriving, healthy ecosystems people enjoy without any kind of side effects. Environment can be changed for ill, can be changed for good. Now, people have modified the environment through individual and collective actions. And it's important to study this interaction for a variety of reasons. For health reasons, see how is the environment affecting people's health? Because yes, all the air around us, the soil beneath our feet, the water we drink, whatever's in those air, the water, the soil, that affects all of us. That affects our health. Ways that are subtle, ways that are very overt, some ways that are frightening, and some ways that are healthy. Health reasons are a reason for studying this. Also, for economic development. For example, where to build what industry to put where, what to build, what is best suited for a particular area. If you don't put a toxic waste dump next to an elementary school. But where could you put a bunch of, say, nuclear waste? Put it in some area where it is fairly safe from earthquakes, no water to contaminate, far away from a human population. That's why some areas of Nevada became very common areas for disposing of nuclear waste, because it met all those criteria. But Nevada, understandably, got kind of tired of this. But the study of how organisms interact with their physical environment is called ecology. It's a branch of earth science, of biology, and of course of geography. How organisms interact with the physical environment. For example, certain kinds of insects build up into swarms. They can destroy entire crops. That is a way that they are interacting with the environment. Cattle grazing on an open plain. That is how they interact with the environment. They eat the grass. Their waste fertilizes the soil, allowing for more grass to grow or to plant other types of crops. Beavers, they're building dams. They gnaw down, cut down the trees, build these little dams, live inside of them. That is part of how they interact with the physical environment. Human beings, all sorts of activities. That's how we interact with the physical environment. From construction to farming to hunting to hiking in the woods, fishing. That's all how different ways we interact with the environment. There are all sorts of different ways we do it. See, because human beings, we don't have to live in one particular habitat because of our adaptability. We can interact with the environment in many different ways. The idea of biosphere. It's the area of air, water, and soil where life exists. Now, there are different biospheres here. They can be artificially created in the lab or, of course, naturally occurring. But there are limitations where biospheres can exist. For example, there are no biospheres in outer space because there's no air, water, or soil. Nothing for plants or animals, microorganisms to live off of. No protection from solar radiation. Go a couple of miles beneath the surface, no life exists. There's no air, there's no water, no soil. There's Yeah, you got soil where it's turned into rock, but no air. It's simply, or life as we know it simply just did not evolve to exist deep, deep into the rocks. Well, there is some life that exists underground. There's a limit to how far down it does go. But generally, there are three interrelated parts of the biosphere. The troposphere. The lowest level of the atmosphere. And up to 7 miles. Live closest to the ground. Closest to the resources we need to live. It's where most of the weather occurs, like we talked about earlier in the semester. Are there creatures that do live up in the stratosphere? Yes. Birds sometimes fly up into the stratosphere, certain species of birds. Microorganisms are found in the stratosphere. People fly airplanes from the stratosphere, but they usually don't stay there for long. Gravity, wind gusts bring them back down, and of course, especially with birds, nothing for them to eat up there. So they may fly and enjoy flying up in the stratosphere for short periods. They do have to come back down. The hydrosphere. Some animals just live exclusively in water, but this hydrosphere is the surface and subsurface of all bodies of water. Hydrosphere. Human beings, we can swim a little bit. Basically, we can tread water. We can swim across the surface and a little bit underneath the water, but only for very limited periods of time. But there's some animals, they live only in water. They cannot live outside the water. Some can live in the water and outside the water, but animals and plants, they do need water. Varying amounts, but they do need water. But the hydrosphere also includes glaciers and underground water sources. Underground water sources, a good portion of the agriculture in this country and a good portion of the water supplies of people in communities around the country depend on underground water sources, aquifers. And the crust, that is the surface area down to a few thousand feet to the rock. A couple thousand feet. It contains soils that support plant life and many organisms. Many organisms live in the soil. But of course, the plants that all animal life depend on plants all that they grow in the ground and in the soil. But beyond the world of organisms, an outside energy source is needed to power the biosphere, drive the system. You need an outside source of energy to keep it all going. In that case, in our case, it is the sun. The sun provides light, heat, that makes life on Earth as we know it possible. Can life exist without light? Yes, we do. We see certain creatures living deep in caves and deep underwater. They don't need light to be able to see, or just don't get along without the ability to see at all. Um, but it's the sun that gives heat that drives the weather, creates the rain, sunshine. It's the sun's heat that makes it possible for liquid water to exist where organisms can thrive. It is the sun's energy, the sun's light, that allows plant life to exist. Plants using photosynthesis to process carbon dioxide into oxygen, which animals breathe. And it is the energy that keeps sustaining that system. The heat we need to live, the light we need for plant life to exist, and the heat to provide liquid water. Now, in the deep oceans, there are some exceptions. There are some ecosystems that thrive on the heat from volcanic vents. There's enough heat there to keep the water liquid, and also enough heat there to allow organisms of various sizes and whole ecosystems to exist completely isolated from the rest of the world, not having to worry about sunlight at all. That actually has given scientists some reason to theorize about life on other worlds, particularly in our own solar system. Like, for example, Jupiter's moon Europa. It is a liquid ocean covered by a sheet of ice, thick sheet of ice. It's possible that the geologic activity underneath the surface of Europa could produce enough heat energy for life possibly to exist there. Does that mean it does exist? We don't know. Is it possible? Yes, under the right circumstances. But with science, imagination is an important part of it. The ability to look at different situations and see what is possible, what could exist. And a lot of excitement behind just thinking about the different possibilities. Brings us to the idea of ecosystem. Ecosystem, that is self-sustaining units that compose all life forms in a particular area. Self-sustaining units that comprise all life in a given area. For example, the ocean is its own ecosystem. It is self-sustaining. It does not depend on the land. But all sorts of different organisms in the ocean rely simply on the ocean for life. Deserts are their own little ecosystems, separate from many areas. They're separated by distance, by climate, where only a few certain sets of animals and plants exist, versus, say, heavily forested regions, where only certain types of plants and animals exist. A self-sustaining unit where all is needed for those animals and plants to survive is right there in that immediate locality. Same thing with desert life, same thing with ocean life. Everything they need is right there. Now, in ecosystems, change is a constant. Life is a constant state of flux on Earth. Evidence shows that organisms evolve over many successive generations, over the many millions of years life existed on Earth. But change does happen because the Earth's climate does go through natural changes. Fluctuations in food supply cause variations in population and what kinds of animals or plants live in a particular area. Disease changes ecosystems, cause certain types of plants or animals to die out and allow others to move in. It's constantly moving, constantly changing. What is in motion? But Yes, I'll give you a classic example of how ecosystems do change. Um, 5,000 years ago, the Sahara Desert, grassland, lakes, rivers, grasses, prairies, all across North Africa. How we have the evidence of this? We found fish hooks in the middle of the Sahara Desert. Fish hooks fashioned by ancient peoples who were fishing in the lakes and rivers that existed there. But the climate shifted and the ecosystem shifted with it, turned it from grassland to desert, one of the most inhospitable areas on Earth. But even though it is inhospitable to us, to human beings, it's a perfectly natural habitat for many other types of animals. Do people live there? Yes. But there are places where human beings are more comfortable. And the idea of food chain. It's the transfer of energy and materials from one organism to another. For example, plants are consumed by herbivores, which are consumed by carnivores, and they often eat by larger carnivores. The whole circle of life thing. Hakuna Matata, everything's okay. And herbivores eating plant life, their waste again replenish the soil to support new plant life. And going in a constant circle. And all these plants and animals depend on each other. It keeps the population in check, keep one group from consuming too many resources. But also each organism playing a role in that ecosystem, keeping it sustaining. The energy to keep other life, their own life forms, own species, but also other species alive by their existence, by part of the food chain. Or nature, it is very efficient. Nature really wastes nothing. That whatever resource is there, life finds a way to utilize it. So even when animals die, there's an entire food chain, series of species that exist to consume dying animal matter. Vultures on the side of the road, or ants, and other organisms. They basically break up and decompose these remains. The remain can be used as used to fertilize the soil, produce more plant life. But the food chain makes sure that nothing goes to waste. Everything is used in some way. Our species evolve to make up for those, whatever gaps exist in that food chain. But this is where the idea of biodiversity comes in. Why it's important, why scientists talk about it all the time. Biodiversity is how many different species you have in a particular ecosystem. Because all these different species here, they overlap. It's not just one species of herbivore. It's not just one species of carnivore. It's not just one species of plant. All sorts of different ones. But when certain species exit the ecosystem, either by migration or extinction, then that leaves a gap in the ecosystem. Creates an imbalance. It makes it more difficult for the other species remaining in the ecosystem to survive. Take out one species of herbivore. Makes it much more difficult for all the other carnivores to exist because our food supply has been dramatically reduced. That puts a lot of pressure on the remaining herbivores, the remaining prey of the predators. When a species of plant goes extinct, it makes it more difficult for herbivores to survive. And that overlaps and gaps in the system becomes harder for everyone else to survive. Too many breaks in the food chain, too much loss of biodiversity, and an ecosystem can collapse because just not enough resources to sustain a whole chain of organisms to survive. That's one that's talked about so often. Now, next time we'll start talking about environmental pollution and different types of it: water pollution, air pollution, land pollution, so forth. So keep reading your books, and we'll continue on next time.